Struggling with your thoughts? Wondering why you feel stuck or how to finally move forwards? Cognitive Behavioural Therapy, or CBT, is one of the most widely researched and used therapies in the world today. But what actually happens in CBT and how does it help? Whether you're considering therapy, supporting someone else, or training to be a psychologist yourself, this episode is for you. I'm chatting with Sahana, a qualified CBT therapist. I'm Dr Marianne, a qualified clinical psychologist. Please like and subscribe for more, and Sahana and I both hope you find it really useful. Hi, welcome along to the Aspiring Psychologist Podcast. I'm Dr Marianne and I am a qualified clinical psychologist. I'm joined by my wonderful guest for today, Sahana. Hi, Sahana.
Hi, Marianne. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. And you are here in your capacity as both an aspiring psych, but also a qualified CBT therapist, aren't you?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to talk about CBT in a different setting. Normally I'm used in like a therapy setting or work setting. So yeah, I'm very excited to share my thoughts.
Perfect. And I know you'll do a brilliant job. So the aim of today, for anyone watching, is that we're going to think from a service user perspective about what CBT is, kind of what it might be used for, and I guess a bit about what they can expect if they're understandably feeling maybe a bit nervous because they've received maybe a letter or an email through the post telling them that they've got their first CBT appointment and they're like, oh, that's really normal, isn't it, to feel nervous about stuff that maybe you've not done before?
Yeah, of course. I think CBT is quite well known, but I think a lot of people haven't actually tried it before. So yeah, getting that letter through the post and not knowing what it's about. Is it going to be, I've had clients say, is it going to be beyond my control? Are you going to read into my body language? So there are a lot of myths out there that would be helpful just to bust them. But yeah, it would be helpful to kind of clarify that a bit more today.
Yeah, and obviously I know when I've worked in services for the NHS, sometimes we're offering services to people that actually find it really hard to leave the house because they might be feeling really anxious, and maybe even with something like social anxiety, which CBT can be really useful for, the idea of sitting kind of across from someone, that can feel really difficult, can't it?
Yeah, so I've always spoken to you, Marianne, about my social anxiety, and actually CBT has personally helped me. And I've always, the equivalent I would draw doing CBT when you have social anxiety is, therapists will be like, you're scared of spiders, but you're going to sit there with a spider, we're going to expose you to that. So it's definitely nerve-wracking. But there are ways to kind of work around it. So since the pandemic, obviously we've made therapy more accessible. So I'm offering remote therapy, but also across NHS as well. That's an option out there. And I think we try to make it as accessible as it can be, work around those barriers that people might initially face when trying to access therapy.
Amazing. So I guess if it feels insurmountable, maybe speak to the service and ask for maybe whether there's any accommodations that can be made.
Oh, 100%. So usually what we would actually do is do an assessment to gauge kind of, are there any practical barriers, any barriers when it comes to sort of their mental health that are good, inhibit them from getting the help that they need, and then to kind of cater towards that, even, there's been a rise in being neurodivergent, and then we actually at the start of the assessment ask, are you neurodivergent? Or even if you're not diagnosed, is there any adaptations we can make just to make therapy a bit more accessible? So yeah, definitely. If there's anything, as always, we might miss something. So definitely do raise it with us or let them know, because I do think the one thing that we would want is that honesty, and rather than just suffering in silence. So yeah, a small call or a simple question can really help iron out things and make it a little bit more, seamless to ease into a very difficult process.
Exactly, because we want people to be set up to thrive and to do really well at this. We don't want them to be thinking that it's already outside their comfort zones. So tell us, CBT stands for Cognitive Behavioural Therapy. But what is it?
So, if I was to describe it as like a one-liner, like a newspaper headliner, it's the relationship between your thoughts, feelings, and your behaviours. So usually I like to explain why it's important to look at those three areas. And I'd like to show a bit of a cycle that kind of showcases those three areas. So when we talk about situations or how we feel, we usually say that a situation makes us feel some type of way, right? So we might say, oh, I got really anxious at that party. But actually, if it is just that a situation makes us feel some type of way, then that same situation would have the same feeling for every single person. And that's not the case. That's not what we find. So our emotions can vary in terms of its intensity, but also we might even have like complete different emotions. And what that really boils down to is the meaning we attach to those situations. So by meanings, we can call them our thoughts. We might have mental images, we might have past memories that might come up, even if it's kind of related to an upcoming situation, but that really dictates how we feel. So if we have a look at this particular example, the thought is, I'll embarrass myself. And, one might feel slightly anxious. And that can have a knock-on effect in terms of how we behave then. So we might be less inclined to go to that party. On a similar wavelength, if someone thinks I'm really excited, it's my big day, I'm going to celebrate, that same situation party could be excitable, it can bring on emotions of joy, and then the behavior would be completely different. So to be eager to go, eager to plan, set up. So these three components have a knock-on effect with each other and keep that cycle going. And cognitive behavioural therapy, or CBT, basically looks at breaking down those patterns. So by focusing on the behaviours or the thoughts, that would naturally have like a knock-on effect on our emotions. So if we shift our thoughts from I'll embarrass myself to, well, let's see how it goes, we might be more open and curious as opposed to feeling quite anxious.
Perfect. So nicely done. And I guess it might be useful for us to think about when we would intervene. So, of course, if we are feeling a little bit anxious about something, like, maybe doing something like this today, or before we went on camera, we were talking about something that I'm doing that's new and different. And you're like, do you feel nervous about that? And I was like, well, not in that particular instance, but often in this instance, I do. And it's absolutely fine to feel those feelings, especially if they are novel. But I think we're looking at when it becomes so that you aren't functional or so that your well-being is affected. So we're not aiming to kind of immunize people against normal emotions, but it's when they're crippling or paralyzing, isn't it? That we owe it to themselves to intervene, or ourselves even.
Absolutely. So, I'll embarrass myself. It might be a very normal thought to have, but again, I think it lies down to the severity of how you might feel that way and the frequency as well. So, as I've told you, when I went for CBT for social anxiety, the level of impairment that I had, I couldn't even order a restaurant. My best friend had to do it. I couldn't talk. So it had such a restrictive impact on my life. And that's when CBT can be really useful. So we're not trying to kind of abnormalize or kind of make scary of like everyday situations, everyday natural reactions, like feeling nerves or feeling nervous in a particular situation isn't a problem at all. It's when it starts having that ripple effect and it's so intense that it's difficult to deal with. That's when CBT can be a really helpful intervention. I also think the nice thing about CBT is that its perspective is all of these sort of problems, if you'd call it, actually stem from really natural kind of emotions. So social anxiety, we all have a natural tendency to want to be liked, to be impressionable. We're social creatures, we want to be accepted. But if it becomes kind of more pervasive and it controls various aspects of your life to sort of really great lengths, so CBT can actually help people, if they're feeling quite restricted and limited with their anxieties or low mood, to live a richer quality life, so that it doesn't have such pervasive control over them.
Yeah, because everybody deserves to have a good shot at thriving, and actually for a variety of reasons, maybe from bullying or kind of the way that we've been raised, or just the people that we find ourselves maybe working alongside, we can feel really undermined, and that can get to us. There's often, we do the thing called formulation, don't we? We make sense. So if we're using like a longitudinal formulation, we look at what might have contributed to this, like what we think about as the precipitating factors, don't we? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so CBT really banks on that. So it looks at what keeps the problem going. So it has a very much a here and now focus. So I might tell my clients, if you fell down the stairs and now you're afraid of walking down the stairs, just because you knew how you fell down the stairs doesn't necessarily mean that will get rid of the problem. We need to look at what's keeping the problem going. So what might have set it off might not carry on. It might look very different now, the actual problem. So within the context of, so when you mention formulation, Marianne, what I showed there is like a skeletal version, like a very simplified version, but it kind of looks at what keeps the problem going. Is it the thoughts? Is it the behaviors? And that's largely down to working together with the client with full consent and knowledge, and just asking them and exploring that problem in a detailed analysis, I suppose. So that way, once we've identified, okay, so these are the things that keeps the problem going, we can then look at, well, what can we do to kind of manage them and not let that interfere our lives so much, so we can dismantle that cycle, basically.
Amazing. And is this going to be like a super heavy thing for clients to do in between sessions? Because often actually clients do want own work or homework so that they can practice some of these skills. What are people likely to be sent away with or asked to do?
Yeah, I think in the earlier sessions, the therapist usually takes the lead with the between session exercises or homework, or as you would say, own work, which I've started using now. What it would usually involve is collecting data. That's what I'd call it. So have a go at this week, just see how you're getting on, jot down some of the things that trigger your cycle. And that can really help us to really reinforce, is this the problem that we're actually working on? And that's really important during the early stages, because one of the underpinnings of CBT is that we want to have a problem of focus. If we spread ourselves too thinly, we might not have any real benefit. So if we have like a overarching problem and we're working towards that, and we're kind of bringing our awareness skills to the table, you essentially become your own therapist, really, through that experience. And once you sort of then collect the data, then we move on to kind of the intervention part, where we would then give tools and techniques for them to try. So there's quite a lot of between session exercises, and people don't really expect that. When the first two sessions, normally I'd spend time just assessing suitability for CBT with them. Does it meet their expectations? Because at the end of the day, we don't want people to feel like that they have to do something like a certain approach because they've been told to. It's a very much a collaborative effort that, CBT. So we usually ask them, how do you feel about homework or, between session exercises? Is it daunting for you, or is it not your cup of tea writing things down? This is what CBT work looks like. This is how it works. So how do you feel about that? So having those sorts of conversations is really important. So that way we're on the same page, and that collaborative tone is there from the get-go.
Yeah, it's not something that's being done to you. It should be feeling like something that you're part of, and we're kind of working with your window of tolerance. We don't want someone to be feeling over aroused, under aroused, so hyper aroused, hypo aroused, so that they're not able to be functioning. And I guess, with CBT, often there'll be an element of kind of behavioural activation, doing something a bit different and kind of seeing how that goes. But what that is not it's not flooding. So actually, if social anxiety is what you're being seen for, in between session 1 and 2, the therapist should not be saying to you, right, go out and stand in the middle of, Leicester Square. Like that's not fair. That wouldn't be right. That wouldn't be okay. But what they might say is, could you maybe consider being in the background when the postman comes to the door and your partner answers it? Like, we're literally trying to break down on a scale almost of 1 to 100, what would be step 1, and helping you to manage yourself to make changes.
I think that's the great thing about CBT, the fact that it's graded, it's a gradual approach. It's not kind of, we're putting you into the deep end, off you go, let's see if you kind of manage. But also the activities that they'll do is aligned with their values, and we make sure that it's meaningful and important to them. So that way there is that motivation to do that, which is, I really feel held back when I'm in the staff room and I'm so anxious I can't even talk to my colleagues. So we kind of gradually build sort of activities to work towards that point where they are able to do that specific situation. It can be quite empowering, but I think most importantly, it's done together with the client. We don't want to kind of do activities where it's not challenging at all, because then what are we really learning here? And I think that's very much the essence of CBT. We're sort of asking ourselves all the time, myself as a therapist, I always ask, what did I learn about this session from you today? And what did you learn about this session, from this session rather? So that generally that learning component is there underpinning all of this. So we want to make sure that the distress or the discomfort is there enough for them to kind of take away something from that experience. So we're constantly like working like detectives, really, like testing out hypothesis, and we're not literally holding like magnifying glasses, but we're looking at these thoughts with a magnifying glass, metaphorically speaking, and we think, well, is this true? How likely is it? Can we find this out? Does it feel safe enough, but albeit a bit uncomfortable? And then we kind of roll with it and see how we get on.
All right, so let's try and kind of get a sense of maybe an imaginary person with real problems that might benefit from CBT and how we do that. So if I pluck a random made-up person out of my head, Jay, he's 32. He has been cheated on by his partner, and it's led to his mood really lowering. It's also led to him thinking like he's not good enough, and that he's feeling lots of shame, and that everybody knew about this and have got things that they're saying about him, and maybe his manliness, he wasn't enough to satisfy his partner. And it's he tried to go back on a dating website, but it was really crippling for him and led to him feeling really anxious, really self-critical. It's impacting on his work. He's feeling like he doesn't want to go to work because there's kind of people at work and they all know, and it's, the referral comes in and it's all feeling too much. How could our treatment with Jay progress with CBT?
I mean, there's a lot there, isn't there? And I think in the first 2 sessions, I like to just create a bit of like a problem list where they can kind of get it all in there. So that way, we've kind of got the main problems, but also if there are any knock-on effects, that's also on there. So when you mention dating scene, that's a key trigger at the minute. But also it started off because of the relationship breakdown. And perhaps there's some self-doubts as well, about how he sees himself, or maybe some negative thoughts like, for example, I'm not good enough. So we'll write that all down on a bit of a list, and then we'll kind of cluster them. Are these problems relevant to each other? Are they linked to each other? So then that makes a problem a little bit more manageable, and actually we realise it's the same problem having like a knock-on effect and having these symptoms, I suppose. Once we've identified the problem of focus, and it could be anxiety, we could specify that a bit more. We don't have to do that at this stage, but we could just label it as anxiety. But then we also look at their goals for therapy. Does it align with that anxiety problem of focus? So if they're saying, I really want to become confident when I am out there going on dates, or, on dating apps, I'd like to put myself forward for that. And anxiety is what's stopping me from doing that. So then we kind of coincide both. And once we do that, then what happens is we start building on that skill of awareness. So this is the stage where I might take the lead a little bit more, and I might say, okay, well, let's find out what happens and how often it happens. It can't just be dating scenes. There must be more to this, but that's okay. Often we're not aware. So let's try and hone in on that skill of awareness. So from the get-go, I'm already kind of fostering that sense of agency to them. You become your own therapist. Go out into the real world and find out what's going on, because I don't know, and I'm very open about that. I don't know. That's what you're here for. You're the expert of your difficulties, and I'm the expert of CBT. So let's work together here. So they'd go out and they'd bring back their data sheet of like a week's worth of triggers, and that will then give us a great understanding of what are the areas that need working on and what are some of the things that keeps a problem going. And like I showed you the previous sort of cycle, Marianne, that's kind of what we draft up together. And it's done together with the client. It's always everything, every part of this is done with the client. And I always ask for feedback. I ask them, does that make sense? Or have I went off the rails there? And usually it'd be like, yeah, no, I get that. Or they add to that. Can I add a little bit more to that? There's something else that's just come up now. So we kind of build on that model. And then we start looking at the intervention side of things. So what do we need to look at working on or managing? So if it is that there's intense avoidance, so they're not even on dating apps at all because they're thinking, I'm going to make a fool of myself, I'm going to overshare, or I feel ashamed, I don't know how to tell them about anything that's happened in my past. We look at managing those sort of negative automatic thoughts, we call them. And there's lots of different interventions, but we might look at that as a set intervention, give them some worksheets to work towards managing their thoughts. We're not trying to replace the thoughts with something positive, but just kind of bringing it back to more realism. And then that can have a knock-on effect. So if they're thinking, I don't know how I'm going to cope, I don't know if I can even tell them I can never be myself with another person, a potential partner, that might shift from that to actually, yes, I've had an awful experience in the past and my brain is obviously on the lookout for that. But that doesn't mean it's always going to be that way. Maybe there are people out there that can understand me, and it can take time. Over time, I can build that trust and open up to them about my relationship. So already the thoughts kind of shifted to something more grounded and balanced, and then the anxieties might be reduced. Might not completely go away, but then that would then it would then put enough doubts in those thoughts to then test them out. I always rely on skepticism. If someone's like completely like, no, I'm not doing it, then we kind of work on, right, what's going on here? We need to improve. We need to get a bit of flexibility there, or maybe there's a reason why, a very valid reason why there's something there that's not explored. But if it's more that actually this is anxiety, it's coming from the past and it's manifesting there, and now Jay might find that actually maybe I could give this a go. Yeah, I feel really nervous, but maybe I can install a dating app and just text someone or swipe someone that I'm interested in. So already there is a shift there, isn't there, from not being on dating apps at all, being engulfed by that fear, to, well, let's just see how it goes. It's scary, but we can find out.
Yeah, and I guess we don't want him to forget that this has been really sad and that he wanted this to work out. But also we want him to believe that he deserves to be in a relationship where, if, just being kind of monogamous is really important to him, that's someone that wants to treat him in that way with respect for what they've got together, and that there is a possibility that can happen again in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think CBT, although it focuses on the here and now, if it is connected to like a relevant past experience, I think it's really important to acknowledge that. It's obviously coming from a place of hurt, a place of fear, even a place of trauma. So for Jay, that relationship, it probably meant the world to him, hence why his brain is on that overdrive to protect him and not put him through any kind of that sort of situation again, right? So it's really important to validate that place. So we're not sort of dismissing it and saying, well, focus on the here and now and, you'll be back to like how you were. But actually realizing, that's really devastating that you'd been through something like that. It's no wonder that you feel the way you do. It makes a lot of sense. And then thinking about, does it align with what you want, how you are and the way you're dealing with this. And it's down to the individual really, whether they're ready to kind of think about doing something different. It might be that, in a complete different scenario, Marianne, if they're not ready and they're thinking, I'm really, really lost and this relationship has taken such a toll on me, I don't even know where to start. That's a person that really needs that time and space to process things. And yeah, but they might not be quite suitable for CBT, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. But yeah, it's really important to validate. That's one of the fundamentals. You need to understand the person, their story. What have they been through? What are their difficulties? Does it connect with the past? And kind of connect with that story, and almost build that picture at the back of your mind, but also share it with them as well, so you're on the same page as them at all times.
Amazing. And I appreciate how long is a piece of string and different services are different, but what is maybe typical for what someone can expect for kind of number of sessions they might be offered for CBT?
So I work at like an adult service at the minute, so it really does depend, like you said, on the service. So it can go up to 20 sessions. On average, though, it's 12 sessions. So it really depends on the nature of the problem. What we usually do to help facilitate that and to make sure it's not abruptly ending or you're not sure where it's headed, we do regular reviews. So I do, like, every 4 sessions, I do a bit of a check-in. How are we at? Where are we at? How are you feeling? Is this something that fits your needs? Sometimes, CBT might not be it. The structure might not work well for that individual. So it's important to sort of catch it early. And, in the first couple of sessions, when we explain, these are the principles, this is what's expected. Does this fit your bill? Is this what you're looking for? And if they're like, no, actually, I really don't like worksheets. And that's for us to then think about, well, what else can we look at? But in general, if they're happy with CBT, we look at every 4 sessions or so. It just depends on the clinician, really, about, are we headed in the right direction or have we drifted? And does it require a bit more work? And then we might extend the sessions with justified reasons.
Yeah, I guess we don't want this kind of video or podcast episode to put someone off. Like, if they've already got it booked, it's much better to go along, try it, and then if you think it isn't working for you, talk to the clinician about that, because they might well be able to help make the right referral for the thing that might be the thing that works. So please don't just not turn up or just, drop out. Like, always talk to the person, because that ultimately is going to help you to get where you're going to be having your needs best met, I think.
Absolutely. I do think, generally speaking, although, as clinicians, we strive to make sure that it's collaborative, we're always constantly asking for feedback, aren't we, Marianne? We're asking, is this all right? Does this work for you? And it's not that we're unsure, we just want to make sure that they're on the same page as us, really. But often what we find is there is still this sort of air of, the clinician's the expert, they know what they're talking about, they're the ones spearheading this, and if they know what they're doing and I should just follow suit. It can't be further from that. That is so far from the truth. And actually, what would honestly help, and I always say this to my clients, is if there is a bit of you that feels like, oh, I don't really like this, I don't even connect with a therapist, let me know. There's nothing personally taken there whatsoever. Just let me know. I'd rather you let me know than struggle in silence, because by being transparent, you're kind of asserting your rights there, aren't you? Which is, this is really working for me. I'd like to explore other options or other pathways here. And I just want to foster that a little bit more, because I don't think that's done enough. From my experience, I don't see a lot of that, despite trying to kind of create that sort of environment. There is still that discrepancy of, well, the therapist knows, the clinician knows, I'm just going to follow and see where it goes. So yeah, if we do ask, how are you feeling about this, how are you finding it, the best thing is to be transparent, so we can kind of be on the same page.
Yeah, and when we're stretching and we're growing, actually things might not always feel super comfortable, but they shouldn't feel so awful that it's painful or overwhelming. And it's making me think about when I'm doing personal training sessions with my lovely personal trainer. And sometimes even when I'm doing the exercise, I'm going, hate it. It really makes her laugh. But like, it doesn't mean that I don't want to do it. It's just that actually, this is harder than I thought. And I know if I was by myself, I wouldn't do this. But because I'm with you, I feel safe to do this and I know you'll keep me safe. So it's okay to have a little bit of that discomfort, like, because that can mean that we're growing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think our brain does that thing, doesn't it? At the moment it feels discomfort, like, I hate it, stop doing it. It's like you said, like but if you push past it a little bit and, you actually might find that this is so rewarding and it's such an achievement looking back on it, right? We've always been there. Even just doing this, I'm like, oh, there's a bit of that resistance where the brain's like, oh, do you really want to be doing this? But actually, now that I'm here, it feels great. I feel like I'm really kind of stretching myself here. So, and I think that's the key. I think we stop usually before we get to that point, don't we? The moment we feel discomfort, we're like, oh, I'm just going to stop now. I don't really like it. Just because it's uncomfortable and you don't really like it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing, actually. And I think that's where the wise part of the brain is, like when you kind of push through just a little bit, if it's within your window of tolerance, like you said, Marianne, when you look back on it, you actually feel, wow, I really did do that. I really put myself out there in the podcast and spoke about CBT, right? And in Jay's instance, it's like, wow, like when was the last time I'd ever actually opened up to someone on my terms? What a great feeling. But again, it's like to say that, well, I don't want to be feeling any kind of discomfort. To do that, it's like putting the horse behind the cart, isn't it? We can't really achieve that. So I think that's important to keep in mind. So that's a really good point, Marianne.
Yeah, and we've got these things called safety-seeking behaviours, haven't we? So when I'm going to get in my car and go out shortly, I'm going to put my seatbelt on, and that's an adaptive safety-seeking behaviour. But if I'm standing in a shop and I'm feeling a bit hot and flustered and I think, oh, I better get my water out of my bag. Oh God, that's not helping. I'll vent my top a bit, try and get a bit there. But no, I'm not going to cope with all this noise and it's too much. And I leave the shop, and then I get outside and I go, thank God I did that, because I never would have coped. Actually, I probably, in different circumstances with enough resources, would have coped sufficiently to buy my bread and my milk. But I've almost invalidated myself. I've drafted and pulled in that safety-seeking behaviour, which has made me feel like that saved me, because then I've got outside and my kind of distress levels have dropped. Okay, but I guess often when I'm thinking with clients, I think about actually how much longer would it have needed until you naturally plateaued anyway, and then you did cope. And often what we find is that people will put in these safety-seeking behaviours just at the point when they were going to ride it out anyway. And then they begin to think, well, I always need that. And I know that CBT can help people to focus in on their safety-seeking behaviours and think about which ones are adaptive, actually make really good sense, and which ones maybe we can just maybe implement a little bit later or use a little bit less, or think about using a different one that gets us to stay in that situation so that we can have that incredible feeling of mastery and satisfaction that comes when a client says to you, oh my God, I did it. I felt anxious, but I stayed. And then I had this really great chat with someone and it went like really, and you almost see someone come back online. And once you've almost taken control of that beast and you've shown it, actually I'm not having a panic attack, I'm not doing that, I've ridden it out, it almost kind of inoculates or kind of kills off the panic. It can't get you in the same way.
Absolutely. I think recognizing the difference between adaptive and safety-seeking behavior is really important, I think, especially when working with sort of if someone's autistic and they're naturally needing to self-soothe in social situations because it makes them overwhelmed. That's an adaptive behavior because that's kind of helping them deal with that situation in that moment so that they can engage in day-to-day life and do their thing. However, that same behaviour can be a safety-seeking thing when they don't go out at all and they're afraid and worried about judgment. So if I was to even bring up an example of working with someone, a made-up client, if they're going to go out somewhere and they're thinking, I'm going to be so overwhelmed, I don't even want to bother going out. Actually, what are some of the adaptive strategies that you've got there? Is it kind of headphones? What else do you do? Is there anything that you can anyone you can go with? So that way, when they put these resources in place, they're still able to go to that situation. And despite having these resources to help ride the wave, actually to put themselves out there like that and to come back and say, actually, I went and did it and I really enjoyed myself. Yeah, I had a minute or two where I went out for a break, got some fresh air, put my headphones on. But actually, I went back in and I, got down on the dance floor and I had a really good time and it was on my terms. That's what we want to see more of. Safety seeking behaviors, what we tend to find out is they might feel like, oh, this is really helpful in the moment, but it might not be on your terms in the long run. And that can be for any situation. So when you're going to the supermarket and you're overwhelmed and you're like, I'm going to leave now, it might feel like it's on your terms in that moment. But then in the long run, the next time you think about the supermarket, you might think, oh, let me just go with someone, or, you know what, let me just order online. It kind of almost builds over time, don't it? And then it becomes this, your life becomes very shut off and, very small. But by recognizing that and actually thinking, you know what, if I can't stay in the supermarket for 10 minutes, let me try for 5 minutes, that's an achievement. If you leave the moment, the anxiety kicks off. And then you might realize that actually, the distress kind of, like you said, kind of starts plateauing a little bit. And that is scientifically proven. So CBT is based on empiricism. So it's just a fancy term that basically means it's based on science, really. We're not sort of spewing pop psychology or, it's not based on nothing. It's based on real evidence. And it's well known that once your anxiety kicks off, if people kind of stay in the situations, it doesn't sustain, it can't go on forever. It has to come down. And people, like you said, Marianne, don't really, just as they're about to kind of, I guess, desensitize or habituate or, just as it's about to plateau, they don't really get there. They kind of withdraw, pull out before then. And that is a safety behavior.
Absolutely. Just before we finish, Sahana, who might not be a good candidate for CBT, or what kind of conditions might not be a first choice for CBT?
Yeah, so I think it depends. So I'll bring on like a few different factors because CBT can be quite structured. So usually you'd set an agenda, and then typically that involves a bit of a check-in. How did you get on with the between session exercises, looking at tools, and then setting, what are you going to look at? If people don't really connect with that kind of structure, then it might not be for them. And that's okay. There are other approaches. It's not that therapies failed you. It's just, it's not your cup of tea. That's completely fine. Another thing I wanted to bring up is if there are a lot of life stresses, and what I mean by that is, I'm not saying that, you shouldn't go to therapy if there's so much going on. But if there were a lot of social stresses, if you're having like housing issues, financial difficulties, and that takes precedent over kind of your anxiety disorders or low mood, then perhaps I always say the kindest thing to do is look at how we can best support you on that. And it might not be CBT therapy, it might be something else. Another thing I wanted to mention, which I want to show a bit of a cycle to demonstrate this, Prochaska and D. Clemente created this cycle for like health-related behaviors and changes when it comes to that. So typically, we want CBT is most effective when people are in that preparation stage or the action stage, and we can really then bolster them to be able to look at making those changes and sustaining them and preventing relapse. However, on some occasions, clients might be quite unsure. They might not be sure whether they're ready for that change. The more sort of figuring out what's going on with them, and for that would require a different approach, I think. So that's why I always show this cycle. Kind of where are you at in this sort of cycle? Are you still thinking that there's a problem, but you're not quite ready to change, but you want to talk about it? That's not necessarily CBT, but there is another approach for that, like counselling. But if you really kind of want to create that change, you're ready for that, but you're sort of wanting that extra bit of support, then absolutely, we can work together.
Absolutely. Super duper. Thank you so much for your time today. You're going to be joining us for another episode where we think about how someone can train as a CBT therapist if they wanted to, or what a career in CBT might look like, and what next steps are possible from that as well. So if you've enjoyed listening to me and Sahana, please do drop some Sahana love into the comments. And yeah, we'll be back along very soon with the second episode. Thank you so much for your time today, Sahana.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been nice sort of talking about CBT in this context. I appreciate you having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching, and of course for my guest Sahana in her time talking with us about what CBT is. If you have found it helpful, please do drop a comment, drop a like. Consider subscribing to the channel if you'd like to see more from me, especially if you'd like to see more from Sahana, because she's back along next week too. If you're watching this video because you would like to consider accessing therapy, please do consider checking out the Talking Heads book. It's your guide to help you to find a qualified, regulated therapist in the UK. And it's a book that I wrote with my colleague, Dr. Tara. Of course, like any of my books, any of my resources, there are links in the description and in the show notes. Come and grab your free psychology success guide on my website, www.aspiring-psychologist.co.uk. The next episode of the podcast will be available from 10 a.m. on Saturday on YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast from 6 a.m. on Monday. Thank you so much for being part of my world. I will see you very soon. Be kind to yourself. Take care.